everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Navigating Work and Grief Together. I'm Jody Lavoie, the founder of Widows in the Workplace and the Grief Company. And on this show, we explore things all related to bereavement and death because it's not a topic people understand, know how to talk about, and especially don't know how to talk about it in the workplace and support people in the workplace. So all of our conversations that I have, you'll walk away with tangible takeaways that you can put action today to improve some of your grief literacy. And today I am joined by a woman that I have been really interested in talking to, the amazing Lisa Pahl. She is a licensed clinical social worker, a hospice and emergency medicine expert, and the co-creator of the Death Deck and the End of Life Deck. Because what's more fun than a game night about dying? And Lisa has made it her mission to help people talk about dying and give them the tools through these decks to help open up conversation using curiosity, humor, and maybe sometimes some friendly competition, because I know some of you are competitive out there. So let's get comfortable today with the uncomfortable and have some fun along the way. Welcome, Lisa. Thanks for joining me today.
I'm excited to be here, Jody. I loved your intro. I think that helping people become more comfortable with death, grief, all the conversations surrounding that is certainly my life mission. So I love that we're having this conversation today.
Wonderful. And Lisa, I always like a fun fact, you all know, and she came from a small farm in northern Michigan. Her high school, she graduated with 24 people in her grade. So imagine that. And she swam with a mama humpback whale and its baby. So I like that.
I loved that. One of my best memories ever. So incredible.
Excellent. So let's just start with what inspired you to create the Death Deck and the End of Life Deck.
So I've worked in hospice and emergency medicine, and in both of those arenas, people aren't having conversations about death and dying, which increases the conflict and chaos that occurs when a medical crisis or a serious illness diagnosis happens. And so, relatively early in my hospice career, I've now been a hospice social worker 18 years, but a few years into my experience as a hospice social worker, I encountered a young family. Joe had pancreatic cancer, and his wife, Lori, was his caregiver, and they had two little kids. And Joe and Lori were like most people, where they may have gotten some paperwork in order, which was great because he was only in his 40s. But they hadn't had a lot of conversations about what he would want at end of life. And so years later, after I provided support to Lori and Joe through his hospice and Lori's bereavement process, Lori reached out to me and we started talking, and we came up with an idea of wanting to help people. Basically, how do we get people to have these meaningful conversations so that there is less chaos at the end, so that, you know, the multiple family members that are loving and involved all know what this person would want and can give them that gift of whatever their end of life preferences are. And so our idea was, well, there are some tools out there, but what can we do to reach a wider audience of people who are reluctant to talk about these topics? How do we add a little fun into the
And do you
topic?
have a sense for, because you've seen a lot of patients at end of life in such an important space, Lisa, and people are lucky to have hospice nurses like you out there to help support them. What percentage or general idea of people that really haven't had much of these conversations before here they are with you in hospice?
Um, well, just to clarify, I'm a hospice social worker, just so I
Excuse
don't want to
me.
misrepresent
Yep,
myself.
thank you. That's true.
Um, so, sadly, it is less common that people have had conversations. But I can tell when they have. When I walk into a new hospice patient's home, um, and the patient themselves has had meaningful conversations with their family about the paperwork, about the funeral, about what who they want to visit and who they don't want to visit at this point. When those conversations have happened, there is a peacefulness that exists. People are still sad. People are still struggling to come to terms with that this person is going to die. However, there's a confidence that everyone knows what the plan is. And, that feels good. When everything's uncertain, to kind of at least have a general plan feels really, really good. So I would say more people don't have these conversations, and we do our best to facilitate them while on hospice. The same is true in emergency medicine. Um, I can't tell you how many 80-year-olds and up come in with no advance directive, no healthcare decision maker, really just no conversations. No one knows what they would want at that point when the doctors are asking. And that's a horrible feeling for families to be in.
Absolutely. And so you've been doing this for 18 years, I think you
Mhm.
said.
Mhm.
What led you to go into this kind of work?
Yeah, my question over time keeps evolving because it's the honest answer is I don't even know. I mean, I grew up on a farm, and so death was part of life. And I grew up with a very, this is very matter of fact view of death and dying. My dad also was diagnosed with leukemia when I was 18, and he ended up making some very significant life changes after facing his mortality and thinking he was going to die. He's still alive at 71, and so he has lived with cancer for 30 years. But I got to witness him make these important shifts, and I saw what confronting our mortality could do. But I didn't immediately go into working within hospice. I worked with trauma, I worked in community mental health. Um, and then I found myself in a hospice position. And within um, the first week of that job, I knew immediately, like, this is it. This is what I am, not to sound cheesy, this is what I'm called to do. This is where I feel like my personality, my experience, and what I'm comfortable with can really help and support people.
Wow. And so many people take many, many years to find what they're called to do. And so, what a gift that you found
Mhm.
it at such an early place in your career.
Mhm.
So, can you help? Since we're on LinkedIn, we've got a lot of working professionals out there. And what is really the benefit to them for talking about death before there's a crisis?
Mhm. It's really, really hard to have those conversations when emotions are high. When there's been a serious illness diagnosis, or let's say a medical crisis where someone has a massive fall, heart attack, stroke, um, emotions are so high, and often the person themselves might not be able to even have conversations. They might be altered, their mental state might be altered, and so we just never know what's going to happen. And I'll tell you that once someone does it, like, receives a stage 4 cancer diagnosis, the focus is symptom management. The focus is, using language around, we're going to beat this, that's kind of the vibe, right? And so it's really hard at that moment to kind of, but what if not? We should have some conversations. We still do have those conversations. Many people, navigate that as part of their job, palliative care, oncology. But but man, if we can start those conversations beforehand, when emotions aren't high, when we can think more clearly, when symptoms aren't impacting our ability to communicate, that's where we can really explore this topic and have meaningful conversations. And I think, talking about death and dying is uncomfortable because people don't have practice doing it. It's like anything else. Once you start having these conversations and you open the door to talking about, what you would want, would you want to be on a ventilator? You're having these kind of conversations. They don't feel scary anymore once you start having them. It's developing the language around it, the practice around it, so that once that medical crisis or illness happens, which it will for all of us, there's a starting place. There's a place to return to.
Okay, so tell us about the death deck and the end of life deck. So, what is the difference between the two?
So first I'll give you the visual difference. So you see our death deck has the skull on it, cute little skull, but a skull, and says death. The EOL deck has our little koala. It's a little bit softer in the packaging and in the questions. So the death deck has 112 questions. It covers a wide variety of questions on death and dying. It's meant to be a game or a tool that can be used in all sorts of settings, whether it's a game night with family, whether it's advanced care planning seminar, um, or even working within illness. Um, but we always encourage people to kind of stack the deck because there's not all questions are appropriate for every situation. And so we added a lot of humor and then multiple choice questions because we found that, of course, if you can just align yourself with an answer or even just get your thinking and then you say, none of those, here's my answer. Um, so it just kind of takes away some of the intensity of the question by making it multiple choice and lightening it up. And then our EOL deck we developed in 2023. Lori and I did. And this EOL deck is meant for people who are approaching end of life. So typically people with serious illness or advanced age. And it's mostly being used as a professional tool for palliative care, hospice, oncology. But family members can answer and have these conversations as well. We just really wanted to give a tool for that time when death is closer and we aren't always playful about it at that point. And the UL deck explores a lot more of the end of life preferences. So really getting into what what sense do you want to hear when you're close to the end? What How do you feel about visitors? How do you feel about touch? Really giving people an opportunity to kind of plan or at least have some say over how those final days go.
Okay, can you read us some questions? Because I bet everybody out there is like, okay, I want to hear some questions just to see, and maybe read a couple from the death deck and a couple from the end of life deck at random.
Sure. Um, will you answer?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll play. I'll play.
Okay. Okay, so here's one from the death deck. Would there be differences in how your family would treat your medical condition if you couldn't speak for yourself? A, no, I've been very clear with instructions. B, they would argue but ultimately agree. Or C, yes, they struggle with choosing a restaurant.
Oh, okay. So I
That might
want
be hard to
to
see.
answer A with they would know what I'd want. However, I have to have another conversation about that, frankly, with my loved ones, um, because I want to make sure that they are clear because it's been a while since I had this conversation. And I think that's another thing. You need to revisit these conversations. And for people out there, I just had this conversation with my daughters in college because they needed a healthcare directive and a
Mhm.
medical power of attorney and all of that signed. So, parents with kids in college, please go do that too.
Good job. Good job.
I was a
Making
little
things
late
happen.
for my 25-year-old, but it's done, which is great. Okay,
Yeah.
another
Oh,
question.
okay. You're approaching the end of life. Others are making your healthcare decisions. Should price factor in? A, yes, don't blow through my savings to prolong the inevitable. B, in moderation, necessary expenses are fine. Or C, spare no expense buying me every extra second.
I want to do a combo of A and B.
Okay.
Um, so A, yes, if I am nearing the end, I certainly don't want to blow through a lot of money, but I also want to make sure that I comfortable from a pain perspective.
hmm
So if there would need to be some expense related to that, yes, please.
hmm Yes, yes. Well, what I really like about that question is, I mean, it's very taboo to be thinking about, should money come into play, right? Money and death, two topics no one wants to talk about. But I can't tell you how often this topic comes up, um, especially with older adults who have worked really, really hard during their lives and have an idea of wanting to leave some inheritance or, leave something behind. And so for some people, this is a really important topic. They really want, and I have hospice families who will tell me, you know, yeah, my dad is in this boarding care because he was really clear that he wanted us only to spend X amount on this boarding care. As long as he was getting as decent care, that's what he wants. That was really important to him. And so, um, yeah, I think, and then other people have the exact opposite, which is great because we're all human and there's no right or wrong answers with these questions.
Absolutely. And having these types of questions helps for starting a conversation
Mhm.
because I don't know, how should people start a conversation about death and opening it up between either their parents or their kids or loved ones?
Oh, there's lots of great ways. I mean, of course, there's this.
Yeah.
Um, but in addition, um, bringing up you, I always recommend to people to talk about yourself first. Putting someone else on the spot and acting as if they're going to die, but you aren't, usually increases defensiveness. So, sharing first a thought that you have, like, oh my gosh, I just heard about my friend. She was in this massive car accident and now the family's fighting because she's on a ventilator and this person, like telling a story and expressing how I feel about it, then gives the other person the opportunity to respond to what I say, right? Instead of directly asking them, what would you want? So making statements about yourself and your own thoughts helps prompt that. Talking about your advanced directive that you just completed it, and then kind of gently inquiring if they've completed theirs or if you can talk over what you want with them, opens the door again for them to say, I agree with you on this, but not on this. I feel differently for myself.
Mhm.
And then
And
one more
I have
idea.
questions in there too, because like, have they completed their advanced directive? There's probably people out there that don't know what that is. Like, how did, in the death deck or the end of life deck, will it, all the questions that would ultimately show up in an advanced directive appear, or most of them in the
Um, Many of the questions appear within the death deck, but um, what I find is that kind of any starting point that you start with, people kind of dive into what their preferences are. Because even though we don't talk about this topic very often, people have strong opinions. I mean, they have stories of people that they've witnessed that they either would want the same or definitely not. Or, they have stories of witnessing family members perhaps die a painful death and they really want to avoid that. And so, um, what I found was we can even start with a super playful question like, can mediums communicate with the dead?
Mm.
Which is one of the questions in the death egg. And that will prompt people to start sharing stories of their own personal experiences or signs that they experience from a family member, which then leads to telling the story of how they die, which then leads to talking about, I don't want it that way. So um, I don't want to say it's tricking people, but it's just kind of like all of you can take a playful approach, you can be more spot on, but people want to have these conversations. So once you just get them talking, I find that, eh, like myself, people don't want to shut up.
Yeah, but I love your opener about talk about yourself and what your wishes are, um, because frankly, I need to have this conversation with my father, and he's been putting it off. And I only have one brother. My brother is, oh no, I never want to talk about that. You're in charge, all of that, and that makes it really hard. And so I think I'm going to be using your death deck to conversation with my dad and my brother because we're both going to be involved in that.
Yeah, yeah. And I always tell people, and you can use media, you can use movies, TV shows. I like to talk about how my mom and I both watched This Is Us, which did a beautiful job of actually showcasing advanced directives being completed and then conversations around it. And so I called my mom up and we had a great conversation about the episode and what she thought about it, what she would want. And so we can use media. People who are watching this can use this conversation and say, attended this talk today. It made me think about some things. Like if you want to have the conversation, there are so many organic openings if we look for them.
Yes, and it's important to set those aside,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, because sometimes it takes a okay, tonight's the night we're gonna open this up for conversation because it's easy to say, oh, okay, I'll do it tomorrow or I'll do it the next day, and then it doesn't happen.
Hmm.
So, have you heard of any kind of funny stories or unexpected stories that have come up from people who've been playing the the deck?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things, the big responses that I get is how reluctant some people are to play, and the look on their face when someone presents the death deck and says, "Oh no, I don't want to do that." I recently was talking to a woman who had hosted a death deck game night, and she she shared that um, one person who came was completely avoidant and said, "I don't know that I even want to participate, but I came anyway." And then she shared that she couldn't get her to stop talking, like she dominated the whole conversation. And this woman who was like, "I don't like this topic, I don't want to talk," actually had so much to say. And so now I do want to say a caveat that people in early grief, people who are struggling with something on their own, then yes, this may not resonate with them. It may not feel comfortable to have these conversations or be doing it in this more playful manner. Um, but what I find is that, there's always laughter, but there's often tears too. Like the conversations get really meaningful, um, even though there's some, you know, tongue-in-cheek uh, humor used.
So, if somebody hasn't really talked about this, their end of life wishes at all, is there kind of a start here? Talk about this first. step.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things to be thinking about is who you want to make decisions for you. That that really is the biggest piece of all of these preparations is being thoughtful about who you want to choose for your healthcare decision maker. Um, and I will tell you that it's not always the best choice to have your spouse or your oldest child. Those are the two common chosen people are the spouse and then the oldest child. But for some people, um, those people aren't willing to have any conversations about what you want at end of life. Or they have a very different view. Like, no, I want you to live. I don't know that I can respect your wishes, basically, maybe they don't even say that, but there's a feeling, right? So I encourage people to begin thinking about if you haven't designated a healthcare proxy, who in your life can be your advocate? Who can you talk to about what you would want in different scenarios openly and they could hear it and be receptive? And then thirdly, who, you know, proximity isn't everything, but it plays in. So if you can find a local person that fits those that category, because I'll tell you the healthcare professionals are going to talk to whoever shows up at the hospital often if it's a crisis. And so having that person be able to see you in person to make decisions is it's infinitely better than trying to make decisions over the phone with information when they can't see the person or they're getting a very small snapshot. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you. Those are good ones. And my mind is frankly spinning of I think I designated my brother, the one that doesn't want to talk about death, to be in charge of my healthcare directives.
Oh,
Uh,
I
I'm
think you should have a
going
conversation with him.
ahead. Yeah, 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 yeah. No, we're gonna have that conversation.
Yeah.
And on a personal note, that the goal for my year, one of my goals is I bought a next of kin box, and they
Mhm.
break down, just document wise and paperwork wise, all of the things that you should have nicely in order, which also allows you to revisit documents you may have created years ago and um, maybe not have your brother be in charge. Sorry, Mom.
Oh, I wanted to add one more thing because National Healthcare Decision Day is coming up on April 16th. And
Oh.
so a lot of people don't know about this date, but it is a date that is designated April 16th, the day after taxes, so death and taxes, right? Um, It is a day designated to complete your advanced directive, to be having these conversations. We're trying to get more and more people aware of the date so that, people can even host. We're hosting a paperwork party in LA and a death over drafts and like a whole bunch of things surrounding that date and bringing advanced directives and just trying to get people to come out and complete their advanced directives or at least get started. Because people just need a nudge, you just need a reason to do it. And April 16th is a great, put it on the calendar.
I love that. I wrote it down and I'll be reminding people on LinkedIn about it. So,
Awesome.
okay. So, what's one small action someone can take today to start preparing for their own end of life wishes?
Hmm. I think I'm going to stick on the advanced directive train here and say, if you haven't completed your advanced directive, at least download it, um, take a look at it, uh, and begin thinking about that designation and how you want to complete the advanced directive. There are different forms. Five Wishes has a great advanced directive that's a little more detailed. There's another organization called prepareforyourcare.org. and those are more detailed advanced directives, so you can spell things out much more thoroughly than the standard one.
Mhm.
So, but I just want people to do, if they want to just do the basic one, that's great. Just get it down and tell us who you want to make those decisions, and then begin talking to that person about that. Um, and the last thing I'll say is, if you do choose someone that isn't um, the obvious choice, so if I don't choose my husband and choose a friend instead, I need to let my husband know, right?
Fair.
And it's an uncomfortable conversation, but we have to inform that party so that they aren't trying to speak on our behalf, and we have to kind of have that conversation with them. And what I coach people about, if you choose not to use that person, is that I want you to be in the role of my spouse or my child. I don't want you to be in this role that is excruciatingly hard to make decisions on my behalf. And so I have talked to this close friend or this person that I know can kind of handle that, and you can just be my daughter during that time. So
That's
that's
really beautiful. I,
yeah.
yeah, thank you for saying that. That's going to help a lot of people that are going to need to want to have that type of conversation.
Mhm.
Wow. Um, okay, what's one thing you wish everyone knew about death that might make it less scary?
Um, I would say that, you know, typically at the end of life, while there are increasing symptoms as the body is shutting down, there is not typically pain at the very end. Like, people find their peace, and um, and it really is kind of like a labor. And so if we think about death and dying as the body knows what to do, it's shutting down, it's doing its thing. Having hospice available to provide that comfort and support and the medications needed to keep people comfortable and get I'm a huge advocate of hospice. I think, having the support of the team to guide families through that time. It is sad to lose someone, but typically we can manage symptoms, and people can be very peaceful in their passing. Um, the other thing is that a high percentage, I think it's between 30 and 50% of people see their deceased loved ones as they're dying. And I see this all the time with patients, and they're telling me, oh, my mom came to visit last night. And to me, that's comforting. Whatever that is, it happens very often. And to me, that kind of, I like to imagine that, people are welcoming them and guiding them in that final stage. And that's what that is.
It's beautiful. I believe that.
Mhm. Yeah, I do too.
So, for people out there that want to get one of your decks and may not be an end of life, should they get the death deck?
Yes, the
Okay,
death deck is our for all uses or most uses kind of product. And I think it's the most accessible for people. The EOL deck I love, but it's a more tender, and it's more for those kind of tender moments, with the death deck being kind of like, let's talk, attitude.
great. And where can people buy it,
Oh,
Lisa?
sorry, thedeathdeck.com.
Okay. And they could find you at deathdeck.com as well.
Yes, thedeathdeck.com. You can reach out to me there.
Well, Lisa, you have helped a lot of people today start to learn how to have these conversations. So thank you for being here and being a guest today.
Thank you, Jody. I loved our conversation. I feel like we could have kept talking for another hour.
We could have, but but it's LinkedIn. So everybody's got to get back to work. So
Yes, yes.
all
Thank
right,
you.
we'll talk again.